Good morning. Everyone make it back from the Getty okay last night eventually? Anyone do the after parties? All right, I heard that that's not to be discussed. So, heard it was a good time, so I did not.
Good to meet you.
But it's my pleasure to introduce you to this team. We've got, I think, a great panel between Peter from Amgen and Geoffrey from Flagship / Generate / Teshra, I think, and Punit from Suki. And this is a broad topic. Obviously, it's a huge category, and we have different ends of the spectrum in a way covered here. We have the development of therapeutics on one end, the delivery of it to the marketplace, and then the actual interface with doctors and caregivers with Suki. And it's a interesting and exciting category, particularly as we're seeing the use of technology, data, AI, rapidly take over different industries, and I think and contribute to different industries. We're really seeing that here. So maybe just go down the line and just talk about what you're doing and what your focus is, what your background, things like that. If you don't mind, a couple minutes intro.
Sure. So my name is Peter Grandsard, and I'm at Amgen Research. I've been there for a long time, always focused on technologies, and as of late, heading up a new center for research acceleration by digital innovation. That's a big mouthful, but in Amgen, everything becomes an acronym anyhow, so it's CRADI. So I may refer to CRADI, and that's that organization that bundles all the machine learners and computational scientists, biologists, chemists, as well as automation experts and data generators, molecular analytical people, together to generate data, reduce the data, manage the data, and then try to get insights to the benefit of Amgen Research, which for us is generating data, right? I mean, information, knowledge. That's the output of research downstream into a company like Amgen.
Jeff von Maltzahn, first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you all for the invite. So I get to be the foreigner, traveler, a novice in this environment, and that my world's biology, but increasingly, these are going to be one. So the best guiding light I can point to in 20 years is the simple premise that biology is going to be engineerable. And while we've been using that term in biology for 50-some years, it's really meant that we can change things, not to the standard of engineering disciplines, where you can succeed when you attempt things. And when we can do that, it's going to be a really big deal. All of healthcare is going to change, and food and more. I'm a general partner at Flagship Pioneering, and everything we focus on is inventing new technologies internally, starting companies from those. So we've got 100+ PhD, MD, PhD members of our team internally, sort of wandering into jungles, deserts, intellectually speaking, and trying to see whether something fundamentally new might be possible based on where technology is going. So this theme of machines, artificial intelligence, biology, healthcare, sustainability is central to almost everything that we're working on these days. So I'm excited to give a glimpse of some of those and learn.
Can you help improve the IQ of the country genetically?
Eventually.
Okay, thank you. Good. We're counting on that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Punit Soni. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Suki AI. We are basically building a speech platform for healthcare. As a part of my background, I was in Google for a little bit more than a decade. I was in search in the early days of the company, ended up actually running mobile apps product management for some time, was in gaming, was in social networking. When we acquired Motorola, I was asked to run software there. And before I started Suki, I went to India, where I was the chief product officer of India's largest e-commerce company. So it's very logical that I'm doing healthcare now at this point. Suki is a speech platform for healthcare. We are effectively building a Siri for doctors. And we'll talk a lot more about it, but my interest and push in this space is to build something practical. The problem with AI is it's a much maligned term. Everybody has a point of view on what it does. It actually doesn't really do much completely. We are actually focused on making healthcare tech assistive and invisible, and we're using AI technologies to do that. So hopefully we'll talk more about that over time.
Great. And just for quick background, I'm Wes Nichols. I'm one of the partners at March Capital. My background is in predictive analytics and bringing analytic science to companies to help make better decisions. So I launched a company called Market Share a number of years ago to help CFOs and chief marketing officers allocate marketing money more efficiently. My only claim to fame on healthcare is I've done 4 human body dissections in high school. I don't know why.
Legally?
No. Come on, man. I think we're being videotaped here. So,
Who we are dealing with right
I
now.
did pre-med for a few years, and then just decided that was organic chemistry was not my friend. So, but I'm really excited about this space. I got goosebumps when I heard your presentation yesterday in the LP meeting. I think that what we can do with the marriage of technology and computational science with biologics is incredible, and I think I'm seeing the impact of technology at the our most treasured assets in this country with doctors and nurses, particularly what they've been through for the past 2 years. They're spending an average of 2 hours a day, or 2 hours per patient for every 1 hour they spend with patients in paperwork, but covering things, which is unacceptable. A friend of mine, his wife's a doctor. I was talking about Suki, and he said his wife is up until midnight every night doing paperwork, working. That's the only time that they have to do it. It's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to a bunch of other issues. So maybe we start with the patient, the end. Just talk a little bit about what you've been seeing and why we're this is real world. Doctors are now actually have AI in their hands, and maybe talk about that, and then we'll talk and get to these guys talking about actual development of therapeutics.
That makes sense. I think the question to ask is, what are we doing? We took a really incredibly, probably one of the most professional class in the country and converted them into data clerks. They didn't go to med school because they wanted to get out and click and type things and fill paperwork. They didn't go there because they wanted to spend 2 to 3 hours a day writing stuff out. They went there because they wanted to take care of people. And if there is a place where AI can help, it's probably this. In my humble opinion, the biggest public health crisis in the country that very few people talk about is clinician burnout. 88% of all doctors in this country do not recommend their own profession to their own kids anymore. And this is going to get exacerbated. Somehow we have decided that over-engineering the process and adding even more regulation to this setup is going to be better. And then the pandemic hasn't helped in where things are going. So when you look at this problem, the question that we started asking was, first of all, AI is like such a broad technology set. In Silicon Valley, even a dog walking app has AI in it. So every thing can be called like it has AI. But there are specific AI techniques around NLP, around voice, around speech recognition that you can use. Can you use them to somehow reduce the burden of this administrative work? Very practical, very direct. And if you can completely automate many of these workflows by just having the doctor talk out, that dramatically reduces burden. And so that was literally the crux of building Suki. Doctors are burning out, very important constituency. They're burning out because of administrative and paperwork and regulatory burden. Voice is the next user interface. Voice is today where mobile was in 2005, 2006. Can we use that as a tip of spear to actually automate that? And at the crux of basically a lot of that automation, they're taking over the administrative burden, is where all data is, because most of the data in healthcare is created by doctors when they're actually doing these notes. So you can use that data and build like this virtuous cycle to further automate these processes. So that was the thesis behind the company. We are about 4 or 5 years in, and I suspect we have made a bit of a dent in it now, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I first heard about Suki when I was laying in an emergency room at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. And I had an ocular migraine, which I didn't know what it was. It's either that or I was stroking out. And the ophthalmologist came in, the head of ophthalmology came in, and he grabs his phone, and he just starts going, just downloading an incredible amount of information in his phone very fast. And so afterwards, like, excuse me, what are you doing? And who's the poor soul that has to translate that into transcribe it? And he said, I'm a test doctor for Suki, and it's changed my life, and everything's now in your EMR, and also over to all the billing codes have been assigned, and it's anything, if I had to send anything to the pharmacy, it would go through that, and billing for you, and copay, and all that's taken care of. And it's like, okay, that's cool. So, and then a good mutual friend is one of your lead investors, Gokul Rajram, who was on my board. So so I was excited about that. So that's seeing it in the real world is super powerful, and hearing from doctors, it's exciting, and I think it's an important mission. I mean, it's critical. I think at the other end of the spectrum is also a very important mission, which is fixing our human condition and fixing flaws, genetic flaws that lead to illness or cancer and cystic fibrosis and other things like that. I know, Jeff, you've been just incredible background in leading the charge and using technology to do that. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, and also maybe generate and test would be great.
Well, and I'll bridge to a portion of what you all are doing in that. Wes mentioned that he did 2 years of a pre-med and then abandoned ship.
Because I heard about all the paperwork.
Probably a wise decision.
Yeah, I heard it was a lot of paperwork. I didn't want to do that. So.
I had considered the same, and I realized that there was, a subset of that path that was staring at a profession that existed today, and hoped that with 15 years of training, one could be in the exact same spot. And I was like, God, it's so much more interesting just to imagine that everything's changed. That profession either doesn't exist, or it's fundamentally different on the basis of what can happen in 15 years. And that's going to happen over the course of the next decade, in part with the kind of tools that you guys are building to take, human language as this sort of amorphous, really inefficient means of communicating to one doctor, let alone the entirety of our collective knowledge about how medicine should work and does. So as you tee up, I've been mostly focused on the other side of things, which is how can you put medicines in the hands of physicians that can do things that are way more powerful than what therapeutics do today. And while we've made amazing progress as a field, we've done so largely by discovering secrets of Mother Nature and making slight tweaks. So all of small molecule pharmaceuticals, about half of the total small molecules that have ever been approved, either come from something that nature discovered, from a plant, scoop of soil, other source, or are a slight iteration on that theme. And virtually all biologicals either come from something that an immune system or human biology has discovered, and finding the right home for that in medicine. If we can understand how the world of small molecule chemistry is the world of all possible proteins interacts with individual targets or whole biological systems, that'll change completely. Even with generous assumptions, all of the majesty of Mother Nature's evolutionary exploration has sampled a tiny fraction of what's possible. And very often with expanding lifespan in a disease scenario, you're actually trying to do something that evolution wasn't obsessing over or paid just a tiny subset of that attention to, reverse a complicated disease process. Or, so much of the unmet need in medicine is in chronic disease and lifelong disease. So part of what we're doing is trying to take on scenarios where one can access large amounts of high-quality data that if you can extract unifying principles from that, you can have a very broad set of impacts in new medicines. And two of those are the companies Generate and Tessera that we're partnered with March on. And respectively, in Generate, we've been trying to learn the rules of what it means to be a protein, the way that amino acids like to interact with each other, so that perhaps we can not just categorize them better in a facial recognition sort of analogy, but generate completely new ones. So what if instead of needing to discover an antibody against SARS-CoV-2 through high-throughput trial and error, or finding somebody who is infected and getting the B-cell clone that defines for you the antibodies that their immune system discovered. What if you could just generate an antibody to exactly the spot you want, or every spot that you want, and simultaneously co-optimize for all the things that are important to be a therapeutic that aren't important necessarily to be a therapeutic inside of you. So it has to be manufacturable, it has to be non-aggregating in a 0.5 ml syringe, it has to be shelf-stable and other things. And we're grateful also to be partnered with Amgen on a number of targets to try to advance the technology towards medicines. Tesra is focused on trying to learn the rules of a category of machines that Mother Nature put almost all of her chips on for writing DNA in nature. So half of all of our genomes are made up of a category of sequences called mobile genetic elements. I'll try to keep it short, but I could talk about them all day. Like, these are the smallest circle of life, and they built most of life as we know it. And they did so by being a sequence of DNA that can encode one or more proteins that can grab onto a DNA or RNA copy of themselves and then put that into a new location. And we realized that if we could figure out which of those still work and didn't break down millions of years ago, which could work on the human genome, and which we could program so that they would write a therapeutic sequence into a given location and not themselves, the implications for being able to potentially cure a large number of rare genetic diseases, engineer cells to do new things in the body were really amazing. And mostly because of Mother Nature's brilliance, we've made some really, really cool progress.
Well, I mean, the way I, in layman's terms, interpret Tesra would be CRISPR was the first generation where you could go in and actually cut and edit DNA strand, but it also has unintended consequences when you cut something, like any time, where what you're doing now with this next generation is you actually go and reprogram the whole strand as opposed to cutting and potentially harming something. Is that somewhat close?
Yeah, I mean, for an audience that thinks about coding and software, a layperson's analogy for what CRISPR is great at is you can go in and, by cutting, turn off a gene. Turning off a gene has value scientifically and clinically, but it's kind of like the technological equivalent of if something broke in your house, you could only unplug it. Usually that's not very useful. Like, things break and you want to fix them because the function is already lost. And when things break in biology, similarly, they're predisposed towards not working versus becoming hyperactive. The latter is where turning it off is really valuable. So when you want to fix things in biology or add new functions, you really have to be able to write. You've got to be able to code, in this case, the code of life itself. So as we all know, and this market is teaching us ever more, it's hard to know much about the future, but with certainty, the code of life and the ability to be able to write in it is going to be a really, really big category.
And that nanoparticles, mobile MGE?
Mobile genetic elements, yeah.
Yeah, that's the big, feels like the big hack here, that you figured out how to use those to change things. So amazing. Well, good. Well, I'm looking forward to 150 years. So at least. So Julie isn't my wife, but Peter, let's hear. Amgen's been at the forefront of innovation in this space forever. Like, actually, development of therapeutics that's changing lives. And like, how have you been bringing technology and AI into this, and the role of Generate and other things that you've been up to, because you've got this amazing history in this.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, just for clarity, you developed these therapeutics, and then you develop the medicine, if you will, the vaccines or the medicine actually go to the doctors that then get deployed, right? Or do you partner with, or you partner with a Pfizer or license it to?
Oh yeah,
other partners?
So our mission is to put good medicine in the hands of patients, right?
Yes.
And medicines that matter, meaning that have the right properties. The burden on a company like Amgen has gone up tremendously. The FDA, the EMEA, the society as a whole expects medicines to work and not just to keep off cancer or keep off a certain disease for a couple months, right, or maybe a year, but really to heal patients completely from cancer, from certain diseases, right? And so we are working on grievous illness. So that's for sure a burden. The burden has gone up even further, and the burden, by the way, that is an opportunity for us, right? That's why we come to work. That, I shouldn't describe it as a burden, but it's a calling nearly, that we come to work because we want to put those medicines in the hands of patients, those really advanced medicines. And also we want to do this with a lot more urgency. What COVID has shown society, has also demonstrated to us as an industry, is that we can go from ideation, from sequencing, for example, having the sequence of the first strain of the virus, the COVID virus, to putting the vaccine in the hands of patients in 12 months. That happened, right? That has never happened before, that we put a therapeutic in the hands of a patient 12 months after we started to think about it. Now, we are asking ourselves, can we do the same for other types of therapeutics, biologics, synthetics? Maybe not in 12 months, but at least faster than, let's say, the 12 years it may take, right? So we're looking for a 10x or a 5x acceleration. And that's where companies like Generate come in as well, right? So we cannot do this ourselves, right? We have smart people in the company, right? In Amgen case, we have about 1,300 people in research, right? About 4,000 in R&D. But we don't have the patent on all the smartness in the world, right? So we have to partner with a lot of people, suppliers, as well as technologists, right? Biologists, chemists, but also even what people perceive as our competition, right? So for example, for the COVID vaccine, we are making the Eli Lilly vaccine, right? In our manufacturing plants. We partner, right? So we are driven by urgency, and we're driven by wanting to put better medicines in the hands of patients. It's what society demands, it's what we want as well. And we do that through understanding disease biology. That's extremely important. From understanding disease biology comes only good things. How does a disease really work? What pathways in our bodies, right? What molecules in our bodies are involved? Can we attenuate them? Can we modulate them in general? And from that understanding of disease biology, where a lot of causal machine learning can come in, we then can get better biomarkers, better diagnostics, right? A more stratified population that we are targeting, right? A smaller patient group that will truly benefit from the medicines. And that then leads to faster, better clinical trials, right? Clinical trials that require fewer clinical subjects, that also go faster, and for example, in platform trials where you can make decisions on the fly to bring in a new therapy in a different arm and stop another therapy all against a particular disease. So, and with that comes simulations and certain decision algorithms to make that happen, right? To accelerate things, to have fewer false negatives, right? To have a better powered clinical trial. So all these things come together in clinical development and downstream from understanding within research the disease, what is it about, how does it work? And then from that also comes then the idea or the insights to generate better molecules, right? Therapeutics. Through generative means. Generative modeling, there's another terminology that you may hear, predictive modeling, generative modeling, right? To come up with sequences and structures of molecules, therapeutic candidates that people may not think of. I mean, we are hiring our medicinal chemists and our protein chemists from the same schools. You could think that there is a lot of group thinking going on, right? There may be, that we all go to the same good schools, right? Where the students are trained by the same professors, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And so maybe, that's a thesis, right? Maybe some of that AI, some of these generative models can come up with sequences and structures that the group of medicinal chemists and protein chemists across the industry may not think of, or may have discarded a priori, right? Because that's what they were taught to discard.
By groupthink.
By groupthink, maybe. That's a thought, right? So we are in the century of life sciences. Last century was a century of electronics and computers, right? We are in the century of life sciences, where technologies and life sciences, like literally, quantum computing, technologies, non-life technologies and life science come together and converge. It's not just AI that is converging. It's miniaturization, it's automation, it's material science, it's the whole thing. So it's a very exciting century. Glad to be there.
Are we further along than you envisioned we would be when you were in school?
Like Jeff says, I could not even, I mean, I was hoping things would change on the fly, right? You know, I've done a PhD, and many of us have, right, in research, but I can tell you, every 2 or 3 years, I'm doing another PhD. So learning is part of my life and part of all our lives. And it's just fantastic.
I think, and that's part of the reason why you all made the decision to work with Generate, because I think using that technology platform to iterate those therapeutic variations, that's the technology surface potential results that maybe weren't picked up by the humans or were never contemplated by humans. Are you seeing other applications similar to that, or?
Yeah, and I'll kind of take it back to those of us who grew up with, you know, what will be looked at as the painful era of life science experimentation. So my first experience in life sciences, I was chemical engineering undergraduate at MIT, interned in a biology lab, and felt like I'd entered into this combination of either a prank, punishment, or a weird game show where, like, all of a sudden I was spending 12 hours on a Saturday to carry out an elaborate experimental sequence, and no matter what the result was, I'd be recommended that we should repeat it with, like, this, you know, Pictionary card that's like, did we plate the cells on polypropylene or polystyrene? Like, it's like you're making this up. Like, how has nobody else, you know, controlled some of these variables before I got here? And I was sustained by a set of philosophical conversations with my advisor that, look, everything becomes engineerable, and biology is next. And Generate is in some ways, you know, a glimpse of what that will mean. And the predicate is that, you know, despite incredible progress, our human brains are just not very good at doing very much in biology. And I was describing yesterday that the protein unit exemplifies almost instantly why we've been so bad. Average protein is a couple hundred amino acids long. Every single position you have 20 options. That's 20 to the couple hundred power in terms of total number of sequences that could exist in just one protein in all of life as we know it. So, you know, unfortunately, at least my brain isn't very good at dealing with atoms of the universe. And, you know, even with the prowess of an Amgen, you don't get to use all the atoms of the universe to experiment your way to success. So there is a necessary transition from high throughput experimentation, biological experimentation, to generative success, you know, and predictive computational depiction of these hard to find peaks amidst, you know, mostly valleys in that fitness landscape. And one of the things that led us to really 7 years ago believe that proteins were an incredible starting point is that virtually the entirety of biologics can be distilled down to one function. And that is to stick to a desired target in a very specific location and not stick to other things. That sounds really simple, but that's all antibody therapeutic value, all growth factors, all cytokines, and more. So if you could figure that out, you could potentially have dramatic improvements in speed and improvements in the co-optimization that's inherent to creating any therapeutic. So as evidence of some of the progress that we've made, a couple of years ago, almost on a whim, as a test of where our technology stood, we decided to take the top 15 antibody therapeutics that are currently marketed, it's $50+ billion in annual revenue, and see whether or not our platform could predict a version of an antibody that would hit the exact same target, the same epitope, in the same binding pose, meaning orientation on the target, with the same structural interface with the target, and yet fall outside of the intellectual property of those paramolecules. In 3 months, our team of about 20 people was able to do that with 100% success. The typical intellectual property estate for an antibody therapeutic is a few % similarity to the exact sequence. And some of the ones that we made were 50% dissimilar. So, think 20 to the 30 plus power in terms of combinatorial possibilities. And with roughly a coin flip frequency, when we predicted one of those sequences, it would work and bind to the target and with comparable or greater affinity. So I remember when we first met Mike Nally, who's the CEO of Generate, that slide was met with some version of a four-letter word in terms of the implications of what this kind of capability might mean for biology at large and therapeutics. Because if you know where function resides and you can jump, you have enormous advantages over life's means of innovation, which is largely random mutation and evolutionary exploration, or experimental, sort of high throughput sampling. Beyond our reasonable doubt, this is going to have applicability to every category of protein therapeutics, antibodies, peptides, proteins, and we're in a really fun phase of figuring out where to take all of that.
It could also shrink the healthcare industry, right? I mean, at some point.
Well, and
if you do
in fact, the kind of dirty laundry in a sense of how far we all still have to go in healthcare is that roughly 5-ish%, 5 to 10% of investigational new drug applications that often have a couple $100 million of research expense behind them and a decade of hard work actually become therapeutics. So what that means is 95% of the time, an enormous amount of passion, creativity, human intellect has gone into nominating something that should go into patients. And yet all of that work has failed to predict population level risk benefit or inter-individual risk benefit. So, if you can increase that by 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x, you have an enormous impact on the total cost of delivering therapeutics, total number of therapeutics that can reach patients. And I think what's lost amidst many conversations about where healthcare expenses are going is that those are the kind of fulcrums of a better healthcare system that we should really be focusing on.
It's kind of the perfect market at work, right? I mean, we have technology innovating that's ultimately going to help curtail the expansion of healthcare expense.
Hope so.
Well, most of it is going in random clinical documentation.
Right.
I feel like a little bit of an odd person in this panel because if everything that we're doing here comes true, then we'll live 150 years and have cured cancer, and doctors would be using technology from 20 years ago. Right? That's where we will end up. And the wastage and leakage that you're talking about, that annual spend in just doing notes has been $10 billion, estimated according to 2016 survey. $10 billion, we could use that in actual healthcare, and some of the work that you guys are doing that would actually make healthcare better.
Yeah.
So there is a tremendous amount of inefficiency and leakage. But what I'm noticing and at least thinking as I look at this conversation is that some of the spikes that we are seeing in life sciences so far ahead than some of the problems that we deal with on the ground in terms of how the actual practice of healthcare is happening.
I mean, I was told one
Economic
time that the healthcare cost, the overall cost, only about 17-18% is the cost of medicine. So and the rest, so 80%, let's say, is in the whole sequence of workflows and all the people involved in getting medicines right from that and well, not just approved, but into the hands of patients, the health care, right, the hospital care, the insurances and stuff like that. So while cost, if we want to look at healthcare and AI, and cost is a parameter we want to minimize, yes, we can do our best in a company like Amgen. There, however, from a societal point of view, we are driven not so much to reduce the cost, right? Because at the end of the day, that's maybe only 17% of what the society pays, but to accelerate to accelerate, to put the right medicines in the hands of patients, right? Now, the right medicines may, in fact, ultimately also lead to a reduction of cost, right? Because if the medicines have all the right properties, not just from a patient point of view, from a manufacturing point of view, but also from a regulatory point of view, meaning the effect is so obviously strong, right, that one can focus on that particular medicine, but only maybe one or two others and not the gazillion other that are approved as well, the Me Too's, then maybe that may still reduce the cost a little bit more. But it's a very complicated thing, and I think there are AI opportunities all over the place, not just within, let's say, drug discovery and development.
I mean, what you're talking about is, I mean, to my mind, it's leading to this nirvana of personalized medicine that we've heard about for so long. I mean, how possible is that? I mean, how close are we? I mean, you talk about the combinatorial numbers are just staggering, and I mean, can you actually get to some level of personalization based on genetic predispositions and to what scale? Because I mean, you can't produce 330 million different therapeutics for 330 million people. So in the U.S., talking U.S. centric now, but how does that all come together? Or are there just or can you are there cohorts or clusters that are good enough?
Well,
Clusters.
we're probably going to say the same thing. I mean, so inevitably, yes. But I'll first depict just how far we are from personalized medicine. Like, to the point of the really challenging role that all physicians are in. Because of time constraints, because of information constraints, we live in a healthcare system where when a diagnosis is made, it is typically deemed to be somewhere between correct and infallible. Mm-hmm. And yet, the physicians doing the best they can with a conversation and a set of disconnected, tests that they're often, needing to integrate the extraction of meaning from. And so that creates these, often very large categories of seemingly a single disease, but which definitively have very large number of roads to roam through which the symptoms that are described as that disease can result. So, virtually all neurological diseases fall in this category. Scenarios like ulcerative colitis or many inflammatory diseases, you're defined as having a disease, but the mechanistic basis for having that disease is disguised. And so, I think in the shorter term, there's going to be a beneficial shattering of these, big, complicated, polyfactorial disease categories into subsets where, they're better defined by math than they are by human language.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been following this company, Cortexime, which did an out-of-the-box, out-of-the-bubble think around Alzheimer's, and had thought that maybe there was a link with P. gingival, or gingivitis, that got through some opening in the mouth, which led to the blood-brain barrier connection, which feeds that. And they did the test, and they got through two FDA trials, and they found 25% of the time it worked for people who had the genetic predisposition for this P. gingival receptor, but for the others it didn't work, and so then the FDA killed it. So now they're retooling the test to focus on that 25%, but that's good news for 25% of people with Alzheimer's or predisposition for that to actually retard and stop and maybe even reverse. That's just one small example, but I mean there's at some point in time, Peter, you'll have a platform like Generate and others that can actually help you do this. You're going to have much more bullseye targeting for therapeutics. That means you can actually have much greater throughput instead of so much trial and error. How do you start to prioritize that, or do you just build to that?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but Generate is really focused on designing and finding new, let's say, therapeutic proteins, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work that comes before that, right? If a company like Amgen will focus on understanding disease biology and then choose the modality, right? Because sometimes if you understand where the target is, the target protein that you want to modulate, the one that you believe is associated with the disease and causes the disease, if that is, for example, in the brain, you don't want to go and reach that with a protein because it's not going to reach it. So then you want small molecules, small molecule, right? But the understanding the disease biology at the pathway level, understanding heterogeneous disease like obesity, like a lot of the inflammatory diseases, will allow you to stratify patients per genotype, right? If there are certain groups of people that have a certain mutation and other groups of people that have another mutation, right? Kind of in the same target protein. And one group may not be healed by the medicine that you have in mind that will interact with the protein that has this other mutation, right? So depending on the frequency of that mutation, that allele, you need to examine a lot of human subjects to figure that out, right? So for example, Amgen acquired Decode, an Icelandic company back in 2012, late 2012, right? They have 180, half of the population, 360,000 people approximately in Iceland, 180,000 patients that are completely genotyped. We have the genome, we know their family situation for centuries, and we know also their phenotype, meaning we have their medical records, right? It's like a living clinical study. And from that, you understood a lot of disease. But however, it's only 180. If the mutation happens in 1 in 180,000, you get to study one person, which is not enough to make conclusions from, right? So we have to access a lot more patients and a lot more people across the world, especially in the world where we, for example, want to sell medicines. And that demands all kinds of new approaches, right? To get to ultimately to that personalized medicine, to understand disease. Federated learning is something that I want to bring up as an important aspect, important technology that we all have to examine very more deeply and apply, because all these human data sources that exist in the world in these different countries will not be able to be copied into one big database. Compliance will not allow that. Ethically, it may not even be the best thing to do. So these countries will want to keep their data in their systems, and you have to yet access it because you have to maybe, instead of having 180,000 patients checked out or human subjects, you need 18 million, right, with a particular disease or a particular mutation. So this becomes a global challenge for a company like Amgen to find enough human study subjects in order to understand disease, in order to stratify, in order to come to personalized medicine. I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
No, it's incredibly exciting. I think that I always like to think what's 5-10 years out. What do you see? How do you see this continuing to evolve? Like in the care. Let's say you've solved this. All doctors are now, making more money, and they're working less hours, and they're playing golf a lot more than they used to. What's next? Just from a technology standpoint, what else needs to be fixed?
I think the challenges in our space, actually deep down, probably similar to the challenges you all face also. AI is not really the challenge. AI is a technology, and speech modeling, intent extraction, trying to figure out how speech recognition, accent detection, are pretty good at doing those things and are getting very sophisticated over time. Suki's intent extractor is at 99.5% accuracy in terms of most doctor workflows already with the data we have. The problem of AI in healthcare tech is one of the prior generation's technology, EMRs. In my opinion, and I don't know if there's an EMR person here or not, but I think EMRs and the current state of EMRs is responsible for at least 90% degradation of all innovation in healthcare tech. It's a shit show. It's impossible to actually work with. Somebody in their wisdom decided that we'll mandate EMRs, but forgot to mandate interoperability. And then they mandated interoperability, and that generated probably another $20-30 billion industry of making these things happen. Yep. So first issue is EMRs. They are an issue. And the more they become interoperable, the more they actually become a place where data can go iron input and output, things will get better. So that's one. Second issue, in my opinion, in AI in healthcare tech, and just healthcare tech in general, is one of bureaucracy. Okay, so for every one doctor, you have 3 administrative people. What are they doing? Why do you need 3 administrative people for one doctor in these setups? Maybe 1, maybe the other 2 are not needed. I don't know what the reason is, but a lot of money goes into actually managing that. And then those people basically help make decisions that are completely unrelated to the actual decisions that people actually on the ground have to use it. So then you come to doctors and patients. The trick for building a product in this space is you have to thread the needle between building something that actually is so useful for the actual doctor that they will acknowledge and accept the change that's required in their behavior to use it, while also making sure that the administration doesn't come in the way because it sees basically an ROI of some kind. And that's a very complicated beast then to manage. And so to me, this is the more significant complication, because you go into these systems, everybody thinks AI is basically a panacea, it's going to overnight change everything. A, it's not. B, what they think it will change is not what the actual change is required. And C, the data, the actual data that we actually need to actually do these kind of modeling has to also go through a series of thoughtful compliances and diverse sets so that we can actually build the right kind of models that can be used and add value. So to me, I face day to day a much more practical set of problems in trying to get this out there. But the only thing I hold on as we actually build this is if you can build something that is of actual delight to the doctor, if you can really fundamentally change the way they're doing stuff today and make it a completely different level, then it's possible that they will have more attention for the patient. It's possible that their back will not be towards the patient, or their computer will not be in the middle of them and the patient.
How does this get used to help with diagnosis? Because it feels like the diagnosis, every time you go to the doctor, they go very broad and they do thousands of tests and start to narrow it down. And part of that might be regulatory, part of that might be ass covering, part of it might just be, they just don't have good diagnosis tools. I mean, it seems like technology could help there.
I'll obviously let people more well-versed in the implication of diagnosis than me to speak about it. By the way, I'm an investor in your company, so hope you do well. When people talk about, and this happens a lot when we go out and we will say, here's what Suki does, blah, 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 and they're like, can you help with clinical decision support? Can you help with diagnosis? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, first of all, do you even have permission to actually go to a clinician who spent 15, 20 years doing clinical medicine? You need to create permission to be able to assist them in clinical care. To create that permission, first you need to make their administrative lives better. Why do they have to do all of these checks and clicks and stuff? When you actually get to a place where you can create that permission, you can then attack this. The problem with attacking clinical decision support, providing diagnostic support, etc., is that when in the times that you're wrong, you create a lot of confusion. But more importantly, the timing of when you provide that advice is important, because otherwise you're just intrusive. You're in the middle of the thing that they already know and art they know. So that is I'm a tech guy, so my perception on this is about consumer and how do you actually provide the data at the right time so it's of use. What data it is and what quality it is obviously something you guys can chime in on. I don't have that expertise.
Well, I think to that end, I think related to that, Jeff, I'd love to, you had front row seats to some of the craziest crap in the past 2 years. I don't know how many people know this, but Flagship is the company that created Moderna. So thank you. But what have we learned in the past 2 years? Have we learned that mRNA fulfilled the original vision? Have we learned that, for instance, the COVID response seems to be very different based on some genetic drivers that, that make it work better for other people, or some people have long COVID, some people, get nothing. Women seem to be better protected with, apparently thanks to estrogen, possibly. I mean, things like there's some interesting things that have come out of this experiment. I mean, if you look at it as that, but like, what's been your take on it?
Well, I'll jump to a couple sentiments on where you concluded, which is with the kind of technology that they're creating, if one can make that leap to diagnostics, healthcare gets to change for the better for everybody. Like your EMR point, I just couldn't agree more with. Like we've been hiding all the data from machines, who would love to go to town on all the patterns of every data stream from every, inefficient interaction we have with the healthcare system, and leaving it in the hands of these really brave but under-armored physicians making individual decisions.
And thanks to misinterpreting HIPAA. I mean, that's a whole other topic, but I mean, that's...
So I did a PhD, but they thrust us into clinical rotations, which was really great. Like we got to pester physicians with questions. And one of them at the time was, when does Deep Blue beat the best physician at every diagnosis? And Deep Blue now seems quite outdated, but it was appropriate at the time. And it was amazing, the stratification between, yes, if, and no, a computer could never do, what I do. And in fact, the latter is just wrong. Like with the appropriate tools and data, computers are going to be better at every aspect of differential diagnosis, and medicine gets to improve with every interaction with the healthcare system. And usually, by contrast, like when I'm interacting with a physician and the consequences are high, you say something, well, what is the probability of, I almost always get asked something like, what kind of work do you do? I'm like, don't change the conversation. I want to know the probability of a bad outcome quantitatively. And that's a mystery. So COVID vaccines are one of these moments where we all get to see what can be. Like 1 year to now, billions of people having experienced the sensational benefit of SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. That was a vaccine that was designed in hours. So from hours of sequence availability to nominating a candidate, to then billions of people around the world experiencing a novel category of therapeutics with more total exposure than all biological therapeutics over the past few decades. I mean, that is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. That was possible because of the relatively straightforward computational link between this is what the virus's genome is and this is what we need to vaccinate against. But that's going to become possible categorically when you can convert biology from a discovery endeavor to a computational one. So the kind of things we're doing in Tessera and Generate aspire to do things that have been historically impossible. So in Tessera, if you are born with a single base pair change across 3 billion base pairs, even if all of the other ones are right, you might not get to see your first birthday. And yet, if we could go to that exact location and make that single change, that child gets to live a normal life, and they probably never remember the name of the disease they were born with. Like, that's the kind of change in medicine we're trying to create. And in Generate, I mentioned yesterday, we think we have the most neutralizing antibodies on the planet against all of SARS-CoV-2 because we've been able to generate them to places that have been hard for the virus to vary, or it's had very little motivation to vary thus far. So all SARS-CoV-2 can be neutralized by generating antibodies against these motifs that apparently immune systems are not very good at being able to solve for. And our hope is that that's, as a field, we're unlikely to get worse now. Like if you take all of the sensational advances of machines besting humans at every human-invented game, and you assume any trajectory of improvement upon that, and you overlay that with opportunities in life sciences, we should all buckle up. Like we're going to go from being underwhelmed by computational tools in biology and it being a service function, to being overwhelmed by just how powerful the future will be.
This is the century.
Right.
If I may,
Please,
so one thing I just want to point out that I misspoke earlier, right, is that Amgen is not making a vaccine for Eli Lilly, it's the therapeutic antibody. Mm-hmm. That'll be clear. However, the promise, I think, of, or the need for technologies like statistical modeling and machine learning and understanding disease biology is also because companies like Amgen are more and more interested in multi-specific molecules, therapeutic molecules. I think it's not unimportant to understand that single monospecific, targeting one target, antibodies or small molecules, in fact, we're going to have fewer and fewer of those in comparison, relatively, of course, in comparison to multi-specific molecules, therapeutics, that deal with multiple targets, that work with and neutralize multiple targets at the same time or bring them together. And like mRNA vaccines that are leveraging your biology, right, to then make the S protein and so forth, right, these multi-specific molecules oftentimes also engage your biology to help attenuate your disease. That's either the proteasome to kill or degrade proteins that shouldn't be there too much, or that leverage immune cells, right, to go and fight cancer cells and help form a synapses, a kiss of death between the T cell, let's say, and the cancer cell. And so more and more you will see molecules, therapeutics that indeed bring together one of your mechanisms of fighting disease closer to the cells or the proteins that need to be degraded. That's very exciting, but that makes it a lot more complex, and hence the need for generative biology, generative chemistry, AI, and so forth.
Well, given the fact that we're talking about 20% of our GDP, healthcare, right, this year, and juxtaposed against COVID, war, shootings, political dissension, I'm leaving very optimistic, and I appreciate everything you all are doing, and thank you for sharing your gifts and optimism to the group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.